Matariki is the Māori name for the star cluster Pleiades, also known as the Seven Sisters. Matariki is also the name for an international network of 7 universities that are distinguished by their historic traditions and unique approach to facing contemporary challenges. The Matariki Lecture Series offers a short program of lectures addressing current research themes or areas of common interest.
This time, the lecture series is on race, racism, and decolonization, with a specific focus on practical impacts of racism on everyday living.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Oh, thanks. Thanks, Nicole. And what I'll do is I'll take the rest of the minutes to talk about the disadvantaged international scholar, and I'm sure there would be several continuities with the points that Nicole already raised. Since the pandemic last year, actually, I've had numerous conversations with my colleagues and students about how difficult life has been without social contact, away from family and friends, dealing with aging parents, anxiety over the fragile health of grandparents, bringing up kids without any support network, and in general, how living life alone has affected people's emotional health and also their academic output. We've talked about being kind to each other, about giving students leeway with their submission deadlines and negotiating their workload so that they can cope with these extraordinary pressures of social isolation. In these extraordinary times, there was as if a collective will to visibilize this very important connection between people's private lives and their professional lives. But I, like other scholars with migrant backgrounds, I just could not help think how, for many of us from the global south who have moved to the developed world to study and work here, this social isolation is so much part of our everyday lives. And we manage every effect of this isolation, often alone and unseen by the world around us. Understand that I in no way want to kind of belittle the experiences or anxieties of people here or anywhere else during this pandemic experiences, but I only want to appeal for a similar recognition or interest in the private lives of migrant scholars, as it has a very real impact on their academic lives. And if we don't, we run the risk of normalizing by way of invisibilizing their disadvantaged situation. If we pay attention to the private lives of international scholars, we will encounter the various hindrances that they have to overcome to establish themselves in a foreign academic setup. It begins with, of course, getting the correct visa, residence permit, accommodation, figuring out all these institutional resources and fundings available and so on. And all of this takes time and energy and sometimes even money, say in the case of visas and permits that many of us from the third world countries have to routinely pay to live here or to attend conferences, let's say in other developed countries. Not seeing these hurdles amount to perpetuating the same global inequalities. For example, most students from Asia or Africa who come to do their doctoral studies in Germany come here with a scholarship. And most PhD programs offer funds max for a period of 3 years to complete one's dissertation. So these students are expected to operate under a very tight schedule while figuring out their lives in a foreign country, where to stay, where to shop, where to eat, how to study, who to talk to, how to deal with imposter syndrome, how to save money for that savings account, how to get a doctor's appointment, how to deal with casual racism, or manage a long distance relationship, right? So they are expected to be productive with little recognition of the emotional duress of living away from family and friends, and in general, all things familiar. And to add to that, many of us from the third world who moved to Germany didn't speak the language when we first arrived here. So so inserting ourselves in a social network of friends or colleagues, it was also not easy. Professional lives are a maze too. In the absence of mentors or role models, it is hard to figure out which academic organizations to join, which conferences to attend, which extracurricular activities to participate in to ensure our survival in the competitive world of academia. Being an outsider means remaining constantly unsure of oneself. A real consequence of being an outsider is remaining outside of information networks. So which mailing list to be a part of, where to find job advertisements, where to publish, how to find collaborators, and so on. And without friends and family, it is hard to access these little nuggets of informal information that makes life smooth and comfortable. We don't think about it as much, but imagine if you could save all the time that you spend researching on how to do this and that in Germany, and someone just offered you all that information in a casual conversation, right? International scholars lack these small but everyday kind of privileges. They are also disproportionately affected by academic setbacks. If they cannot find a job immediately after they graduate, they would have to pack their bags and leave. If they cannot finish on time, they might have to leave the country in between their studies. Sometimes these dissertations are never finished. If we do not pay careful attention to what goes on in the private lives of scholars with migrant backgrounds, the problem of retention will always remain a puzzle. Most universities these days aspire to have an international presence and actively seek international students of diverse backgrounds. But without clear strategies to retain these scholars after their studies, the whole exercise seems to be an immense wastage of resources and potential. At present, even if there appears to be a sizable amount of students from the global south in German academia, their number noticeably diminishes at postdoctoral level and almost is negligible at professorial level. I think if we could retain more of these senior scholars of migrant backgrounds, the younger scholars could have someone they can relate to, uh, someone accessible to reach out to, and whose very presence in some sense shows it is possible to make it in German academia in spite of the structural disadvantages that they face. Um, just as like Nicole said, quick reflections. So possible strategies that I think that can help retain international scholars, and we can probably discuss this at length during the Q&A, are, as I said, an interest in their personal lives. By this way, you sort of at least register the problems that they face, and you basically, we can get to know their problems. That is like the first step towards you get to know the problem. And then I think mentorship programs can also help, because that way too I think you have more communication with the student, and these mentors do not necessarily, I think, have to be people of similar like migrant backgrounds. This could be just someone who is in a position higher up but is interested in the private lives through everyday kind of conversations. They're in conversation with the students. That could be another way of knowing what are the problems faced by these students. And then there could be international scholars networks, like some kind of platforms where these problems and solutions can be discussed. And this again kind of is dependent on their number, right? If there are no international scholars, there would be no network. And then a fourth point could be university administrative officers. I've seen this in Tübingen, who work in close liaison with government agencies. So you have like these kind of middle person who sort of can, because sometimes just understanding the know-how of government, especially in Germany, a lot of the information is available in German, and if you don't know the language, it's very hard to kind of navigate these websites and process all the information. And the fifth point would be some kind of flexibility in the study program structure. So if you set out and if you say like 3 years for everyone, irrespective of like, what disadvantages they have, like that just, I think, doesn't work, because you don't then take into account that not everyone starts. I mean, this is about the level. It's not a level playing field that people start out with. And generally, my last point would be this general atmosphere of kindness that we have sort of agreed upon during these years of the pandemic. I think it would be nice if we could kind of sustain this atmosphere. And so, for example, when I begin a class these days, I always ask if everything is fine with my students and so on and so forth. And I think there is a need for this space where people can, we do this in Tübingen, but I do not think this is a very widespread practice. And I would really stress the importance of this interpersonal space, because I think it's not just about making people feel good, but if your students feel good, they are also going to be more resourceful, and their academic output is also going to be affected by this, right? So yeah, that's all that I have to add.